Greetings, dear viewers, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to Addis Dialogue with me, Jean-Pierre Uwimana. Whenever we talk about Africa, there are a number of countries on the continent that have no access to sea outlets. And what are some of the challenges that they face simply because they have no access to sea outlets? These and other issues along that line will be our discussion points, and I'm joined by Reverend Jean-Pierre Uwimana from the University of Rwanda. He's going to help us find some answers to these questions with the program. I'm Jean-Pierre Uwimana. Do stay with us. Reverend, thank you so much for joining me. So great to see you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into the questions. As you know, Reverend, it goes without saying that there is huge economic disparity between countries with access to sea outlets and those without. So the question might naturally go as to how they strive for development on the one hand, while also dealing with issues of being landlocked on the other. So my first question for you would be, sir, how are landlocked nations trying to make ends meet economically?
Thank you very much. You know, landlocked country is a country which is entirely surrounded by land, and it does not have a territory connected to the ocean. And today we have 44 landlocked countries around the world, and we have 16. Of course, in Africa, the last one is not only recognized as it is. So being a landlocked country creates socioeconomic disadvantages, even political ones. If a country does not have access to international waters, this really cut the nation from important sea resources such as fishing, such as mining, such as recreation, of course, tourism, entertainment, etc. So there is a high cost. There are high costs and the delays of goods transportation, of course, and people traveling. Importations and exportations, they become very hard to take that way. Landlocked countries are, of course, limited in the trading activity with the rest of the world. And one author wrote, if you are coastal, you serve the world. If you are landlocked, you serve your neighbors. And now traveling between landlocked country and other countries which are not borders of the said country, requires travelers to pass borders controls many times. This is it gives headaches sometimes, and it is not good. So there are a limitation of opportunities to grow and to develop the economies. Those are the challenges which can lead to a stagnation of economies. And we had also political disadvantages, of course, and some repercussions. To sum up, losing access to the sea is generally a great loss of a country, politically, militarily, and socio-economically. However, being landlocked has an advantage, and the advantage is that when a country has some difficulty, they have to create their own initiatives to create a kind of natural tariff barrier and a kind of self-defense, kind of self-sufficiency mechanisms. The country can develop a robust local food system, food self-sufficiency, food industries, and so on. The citizens can have some initiatives just to solve their own problems in the socio-economic sector.
Thank you, Reverend, for that idea. However, sir, unfortunately, it's a reality for many of the landlocked African countries to have huge difficulties having access to salaries, being devoid of direct access to seas. And as such, they suffer perpetual disadvantage on their development. So what strategies of communications do you maybe offer to mitigate such challenges?
I think there are too many strategies for communication just to mitigate such challenges. I wanted to emphasize on internal communication and external communication. Internal communication is reserved to the citizen. It's internal in the country. This internal communication should emphasize on working, on showing different opportunities to the citizens, some innovations to achieve self-sufficiency, as I have said, and to develop local industries. And even there is no incentive to grow the manufacturing sector, since the exports are already at a competitive disadvantage due to the increased costs and the delays associated with transporting goods. The send of a message in internal communication will be, of course, the government and the government institutions, just to communicate, to do what we can call communication for development, reserved to the citizens, behavior change communication. The citizens have to understand exactly that they have to not to wait for help from outside, and they have to produce themselves, and of course to emphasize on that group, on the members of the diaspora, which should also understand that they have to invest in their own country, in the native country. This is what we can call, what I'm calling internal communication, just to push to show to the population, local population, that they have there some opportunities just to make them in the profit. The other side is that external communication, which is done vis-a-vis towards neighbors to other countries. And it will be important to emphasize on the political and the diplomatic meetings and the dialogues related to the good neighborhood and the cooperation. And the messages will be about signing the trade agreements between the countries to have a good cooperation for getting free transport of goods. Of course, we have some international instruments which will allow this communication to get well, to be in a good way. For example, when we talk about the Convention of International Transport of Goods under cover of TIR canets, this kind of a convention has been signed in November 1975, and now it has more than 70 members. This include also some North African countries. This can be an example of what it can be signed as a convention, what it can be signed as an agreement, and the communication should emphasize on that kind of instruments, international instruments, to be signed between the countries. So to sum up, internal communication is reserved to the citizens internally, and external communication will be very good for neighborhood.
That's a great point. A great point that you've just raised. Moving on from there, Reverend, as you know, Ethiopia is one of the most populous countries in Africa, only next to Nigeria. And the irony is that such a great nation as Ethiopia is devoid of access to sea outlets. So how do you see Ethiopia's move towards having access to sea outlets, in mutual collaboration with neighboring countries?
Yes, Ethiopia is a populous country in Africa. It has more than 120 million of people for population, and it is on the second rank after Nigeria, of course, and it occupies 11th place in the world to have a huge number of population. Having access to sea outlet from neighboring countries is the right of Ethiopia. It is its own right. When we come back on a different agreement or different laws in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, recognizes that special needs of landlocked countries, and it provides a framework of addressing their rights and obligations. Landlocked countries have the right to access to and use the high seas and enjoy freedom of transit through other countries' territories to reach the sea, of course. This right is based on the principle of freedom of navigation, which is essentially for landlocked nations to engage in international trade and maintain economic development. So, an amicable solution to facilitate access to the sea and the transit of goods for landlocked Ethiopia can be found with neighbors. Neighbors, I mean Eritrea, which has some two ports close to Ethiopia. I mean Asab port, Massawa port in the north of Ethiopia. When we go down, we see also Djibouti with the port of Djibouti, Somalia, Mogadishu port, Bosaso port, Sudan, port of Sudan, Kenya also, Lamu port. And those ports can serve to Ethiopia just to get importations and to send exportations of goods. I'm thinking also about Somaliland, Berbera port. You know that a memorandum of understanding is already signed between Ethiopia and Somaliland. This is another good step. Those ports, more than 7 ports can serve. They are closer to Ethiopia. We have others, but those are close to Ethiopia. They can serve the country if there is a good cooperation. If the country can discuss about this.
Talking about Ethiopia and Somaliland, as you mentioned, and as you know, sir, Ethiopia has already signed an MOU with Somaliland. What are your overall evaluations of the current MOU signed between Ethiopia and Somaliland regarding access to sea outlets?
Yes, my evaluation of that memorandum of understanding, which was signed this month, on the 1st January this year. Yes, two personalities, two leaders, the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of Ethiopia and the president of Somaliland, Bihi Abdi, they signed that memorandum of understanding. And this memorandum allows to Ethiopia to have 20 kilometers, it means 12 miles of Berbera port for 50 years. For me, this is a kind of cooperation, good diplomatic way for neighbors. Diplomacy and the politics are about mutual interests. If you don't have interest, you will not sign a kind of MOU. This is a good step. I appreciate personally, and I encourage this country or those countries to go a way to make it up and to continue this cooperation. This is just the one access for Ethiopia to access to the sea of a memorandum of understanding should be signed also with other countries. I know it is somehow political an issue which is not appreciated by some neighbors maybe, but this is a good way, this is a good step. It's important to access to the sea. It's the right of Ethiopia.
As you know, genuine communication is deemed to be the best tool to avoid miscommunications and contentions of any sort. So what are some of your suggestions for Ethiopia in particular, and for other nations for that matter, so that this East African nation will have multiple and alternative ports, which its booming economy is making a necessity? What are some of your suggestions here?
Ethiopia has to initiate and to engage a dialogue with neighboring countries and sign agreements to access to different ports. Of course, this initiative has to come from Ethiopia because Ethiopia is the one in need just to access to the sea. And the initiative will come from Ethiopia to discuss with the neighbors, to discuss with other countries. And this should make reference to international laws. As I said, of course, the communication, important message will be to defend exactly the rights of Ethiopia to access to the sea. Of course, a good dialogue, a political dialogue, a diplomatic dialogue is made concrete through actions for both parties. And this communication should be a kind of emphasizing on other countries can do towards Ethiopia. And the country, Ethiopia could continue to maintain more good relations with the neighborhood, of course. And this communication should also come back on the countries to develop on the citizens, as I said. The country should emphasize on internal communication to push people, to push citizens to develop some initiatives, to make available some specific products and to attract neighbors, other countries, to propose those products. Why not, as an exchange to access to the ports? I'm thinking about internal tourism. I'm thinking about agriculture. Ethiopia is the first country, if I'm right, which produces good coffee. I like it. And also local industries and facilitating investors in the country. Those products, when we communicate, they have the good products to be maybe a kind of exchange to access to the port and to attract neighbors also, and emphasize this in the package of good cooperation, the package of diplomatic way. This can be a benefit for Ethiopia.
Reverend Jean-Pierre Uwimana, lecturer at the University of Rwanda, thank you so much for your ideas and for giving us some of your precious time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you a lot, and we keep in touch.
Absolutely. I also look forward to continuing such wonderful discussions in the future. Thank you, sir, again. Well, dear viewers, with that, we come to the end of today's program. Thank you as well for having been with us so far. Until I see you next time with another program, it's a bye-bye from me, Jean-Pierre Uwimana.